Okay, so today is February 2nd. It's the Feast of the Presentation. So I thought I would just go over a couple things about the presentation because this is maybe one of the more confusing feasts because of the two things that are included in it, which first is the timing of it. The 40 days after a male childbirth required purification in the temple for the woman. And that was Leviticus chapter 12. I've got some cheat notes down here because it's not that easy to remember. So the woman would be unclean for 7 days, then she had to wait 33 more days. And that's also where on the eighth day the circumcision was prescribed in that law. For a girl, she would be unclean for 14 days and then had to wait 66 more days. Okay, so then they had to present themselves in the temple, and then they had the offering that was prescribed. The offering was for the purification of the woman, not for the consecration of the firstborn son. I'm going to come to that next. So basically, that she had to present herself to the priest and offer the lamb, or if she couldn't afford the lamb, then 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons. And one for burnt offering and one for a purification offering. And then the priest shall make atonement for her, and then she'll be clean. Okay, so that's Leviticus chapter 12. Then in Exodus 13, that's where the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Consecrate to me every firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the Israelites, whether of human being or beast." So that included the girls too. They had to be offered to God, and then there again it wasn't the timing. There was no set timing set on it, but they did have to go to the temple because that was also in Leviticus 12, where it says that she had to bring the offering to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting, which was in the temple. So it was understood that the offering of the firstborn would take place in the temple. So what they had to do is they had to ransom their firstborn back by making an offering for that. And again, although it doesn't look like there was a prescribed offering for the buying the firstborn back, I think somewhere it says later there were so many shekels that they had to pay for that. Also, the other thing is that, you know, when would this have gone? Because the passage in the Bible that deals with the presentation in the temple is St. Luke, and he doesn't mention either the visit of the kings or later he doesn't mention the massacre of the Holy Innocents. He doesn't mention the flight into Egypt. It's like, so what? None of that stuff happened? But of course it happened. So to put it in perspective as to when did all this stuff happen? Okay, so 40 days after the birth of Christ on the 25th. That's what brings us to February 2nd. So where was the Holy Family during that time? Remember, it was a 5-day journey from Bethlehem to Nazareth and back, where they had come from. And remember, it's still dead of winter now. It's January. I mean, it's still dead of winter. So plus they had to wait for the kings to arrive because the kings weren't there like right away. I think in the church we have it like 8 days after the birth, you know, but somewhere around there, you know. So they were in the cave of the Nativity at least until after the kings visited, and also the circumcision on the 8th day. So probably the priest from the local synagogue in Bethlehem would have come out to do the circumcision. At any rate, there, you know, if you read Mary of Agreda, you realize, okay, so they didn't stay in the cave of the Nativity the entire time. After the kings visited, they were invited to stay in the home of a woman who lived very close to where they were, right inside the walls of the city. And they went and stayed there until it was time to go to Jerusalem for the purification, because they didn't have like high-speed trains and Ubers and freeways. They couldn't just jet back to Nazareth and then jet back for the presentation. So for practical reasons, I mean, they were, because Bethlehem was a one-day journey from Jerusalem. So I mean, it was a lot easier. Instead of making it 6 days, it would have been 6 days had they gone back to Nazareth. 6-day journey would have been pretty rough with a newborn in the dead of winter. Okay, so they waited there. Then the day before the presentation, that's when they left and went to Jerusalem. Now, in the meantime, the evidence that what happened to, so it's interesting, the offering of the poor that they did give, the 2 turtle doves or pigeons, they gave the offering of the poor. So how did they do that? Because the kings had just been there giving them gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I mean, that was taking them out of the poverty category, having a bunch of gold, right? So that's how Mary of Agreda explains, well, how did they get back to poor? And they got back to poor quick, because they gave it all away already before they went for the purification. They gave a lot of it strictly to the poor, but they also made an offering at the temple before the purification. So it was all gone. Because it's like St. Joseph and Mary were allergic to money. St. Joseph never asked for any remuneration of anything for any work that he ever did. Never asked for a penny for anything. St. Joseph was the biggest lover of poverty that you could possibly imagine. They hated money. Jesus hated money even more. He never touched money. Jesus never touched money. Even when they asked about the offering, the coin for the temple tax, that he told St. Peter to go get it from the fish. He didn't say, give it to me. He said, show it to me. He didn't touch it. Okay, so that should be a lesson to us about money, which, as I guess as St. Paul later says, money's the root of all evil. At any rate, so they went to the temple, and it's interesting. So we had Simeon and Anna at the temple. Very, very interesting. Turns out, Anna was Mary's head mistress and teacher when she was consecrated in the temple when Mary was 3 years old. So Anna knew Mary. Anna was pretty familiar with Mary. She also was pretty aware of Mary's holiness too, because obviously she had her under her direction for about 13 years before she was married off to St. Joseph. And St. Simeon was a priest at the temple. Luke doesn't say priest, he just calls him a man, but he was a priest. And it makes sense, because they had to give the offerings to the priest. So he was a priest at the temple. He was a Levite. That's where the offerings had to be made. They were buying back. That's how the Levites made their offerings, is because on the ransoming of the firstborn, that money and offering went to the Levite, the priest. At any rate, so then Simeon's prophecy, very interesting. A sword shall pierce your soul, so that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. So, so Mary wasn't aware right at that time the full extent of the sword piercing, because that was going to culminate on Calvary with the piercing of the soldier's lance. And to understand that, you have to realize that Mary look, this is her son being tortured to death right in front of her eyes. So she was allowed to suffer the passion with Jesus because she asked for that. For her, since she couldn't take it from him and put it on herself, so that's what she did. She suffered with him. And you can see there's quite a few people in history, in the church, saints and people like that, who have suffered the passion, like on Good Friday and things like that. Well, Mary suffered it in real time. But so, including the death on the cross. But if you go to there, okay, so now Jesus is dead on the cross. He can't feel any more pain. He's done. The last drop of his blood is done. His last breath. His heart has beaten until it can't beat anymore. He's gone. So here comes this centurion, and Mary didn't know. So a lot of things, Mary knew a lot of things that were going to happen in advance. Some things God hid from her, and that was one. She didn't really know that was going to happen, but she felt the pain. She felt the pain of the lance. Because Jesus couldn't feel it anymore, but she could. So, I think that's pretty important, what we owe to her for that. And the other thing is that, so after that, you can fast forward to later where she did, to the finding in the temple. I wanted to mention a couple more things about the things that were hidden from Mary that can easily be misunderstood. So first of all, the flight into Egypt that St. Luke didn't talk about. So, St. Luke skips straight to, it says, and then they returned to Nazareth and were obedient to fulfill the law. Yeah, that was when he was 7 years old, but they were in Egypt for 7 years. Because, they didn't, so what happened is, this edict from Herod went out as soon as he realized the kings weren't coming back to him, which was within a couple of weeks of Christmas. When they didn't get back to him within 2-3 weeks, he's like, that's it. That's when he ordered the murder of the children. And so the edict was already out there at the time of the presentation. They didn't have time to go back to Nazareth or to go somewhere else first. In fact, St. Joseph, later if you can find out that St. Joseph, they were considering stopping at Hebron, where St. John the Baptist was and St. Elizabeth, but they just, no, and that was even almost on the way to Egypt, and they said no, they had to go straight to Egypt. Because what happened is, after the presentation, they wanted to make a novena at the temple in Thanksgiving. And it was on the 5th day of the novena that they were informed, no, you're going to Egypt. And so they packed it up that night, and they left. First day, 24 hours, it took them to get to Gaza City. And then after that, they waited a couple of days. St. Elizabeth was able to send a messenger with some help, some provisions. They had nothing. Down with a servant down to Gaza, because they did communicate by angels then. Mary and St. Elizabeth, they communicated through their angels. And at any rate, so then I don't know exactly how long it took them to cross the Sinai. Because after 3 days, because 1 day to get to Gaza, a couple of days they spent there, and then off crossing the Sinai, it took them quite a while to get there. At any rate, so wanted to mention that. And then later, when at the finding in the temple, Mary was accustomed to seeing the operations of Jesus' soul in real time. She generally, because what was Jesus doing? What did Jesus do all the hidden years? What was Jesus doing before he showed up at the banks of the Jordan to start his ministry? Mostly what he did as a child was he prayed for us. He prayed for us. Well, you think how many billions of people there are that he had to pray for? Full-time job. He prayed, and Mary prayed with him. So generally, she copied what he did. But there were a couple times where he hid what he was doing, and one was when he left and went to the temple, and when he was 12. He distracted her with some other thoughts, and that's the only way that he could have evaded St. Joseph and Mary. At any rate, so he distracted her and St. Joseph. It took him 3 days to find him, and when he said, though, when they found him, that's what I wanted to put into context. That's how you can understand what Mary said to him. It was like she was just wanting to know why he did it, because normally he never hid anything. She was wondering, did I do something wrong? Did St. Joseph and me, did we do something wrong? Is that why we didn't know where you were going? And and that's why she said, "Your father and I have been searching with you with much anxiety." Well, he knew that, of course, and she knew he knew that. But I mean, have you ever had a severe test that was stressing you, and you early were at your wits' end, and finally you get relief, and God comes to your rescue, and you're like, "Thank God." So sometimes even Mary had reached that point, and God broke her. He broke her, and so that's why she said that. And that's when when Jesus said, "Hey, you didn't know I had to be in my Father's house." Well, basically that was a statement. It wasn't really a question. He just basically, "No, you didn't know. No, you didn't know I needed to be in my Father's house. Now you know I needed to be here." And he had a very high purpose for being there, because it was at that time, there was a special meeting going on with the scholars of the law about the coming of the Messiah. And they were arguing about, was he just going to come as a triumphant king? Or some had read the scriptures properly and noticed that, what about the suffering servant passages and the suffering? I'm a worm and no man. How do you explain that? Well, Jesus explained all that to them then. He explained how there was going to be two comings. The first coming in expiation for sin and the suffering, and the second coming in glory. And he did it in such a way, he didn't just, say it like how I just said it. He led them to understand that by asking questions. I guess that's called the Socratic method, at any rate. But that's another reason why later, during the interrogations, during the Passion, on Holy Thursday night and Good Friday morning, he didn't go into any more detail, because really it was these same scholars of the law that had all this explained to them in very thorough detail when he was 12. So it's not like they hadn't heard it before. They had heard it, they just didn't want to accept it. So I thought I would just mention that.